Europe, 1939. The world stands on the edge of catastrophe. In the wake of the Great War, people had promised never again. But now, 2 decades later, the fires of conflict are rising once more. Hitler's armies have swept across Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France with a terrifying new form of warfare, blitzkrieg, lightning war. The nations of Europe crumble under the boots of Nazi divisions, and the swastika casts its shadow across the continent. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill steps before the British Parliament and delivers words that would echo through time. The Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Britain now stands alone. The beaches of Dunkirk still smolder, and hundreds of thousands of exhausted soldiers have returned home, saved by a miracle of small boats and courage. But they left their guns, their tanks, their vehicles behind. Across the English Channel, the German war machine is gathering strength, poised to strike the final blow. For Hitler, the road to domination now leads through the skies above Britain. To invade, his armies must first control the air. Without it, the Royal Navy would destroy any invasion fleet before it reached the beaches. The task falls to the Luftwaffe, Germany's mighty air force, and its proud commander, Hermann Göring. The Luftwaffe has crushed every opponent so far. Göring boasts that his bombers will sweep the Royal Air Force aside in a matter of days. He imagines himself watching Britain burn from his balcony in Berlin. But across the Channel, another man is preparing to defy him. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, a quiet, meticulous leader who believes victory lies not in glory, but in preparation. The summer of 1940 begins with tension in the air, the hum of engines over southern England, the distant thud of bombs across the Channel, and the grim realization that the fate of the free world now rests on a small island and a handful of pilots. The stage is set for the greatest aerial battle in history. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. In Berlin, Hitler turns his gaze westward. France has fallen faster than he ever dreamed possible. Now Britain is isolated, its army battered, its allies gone. Operation Celion is born, the grand plan to invade the British Isles. But Hitler faces a problem. The English Channel is a narrow strip of water, yet it is the most heavily defended in the world. To send his troops across, he must first gain absolute control of the skies. Without that, the German Navy cannot protect the invasion barges. The mission falls to the Luftwaffe. Göring assures his Führer that his air fleets will destroy the RAF within weeks. He has nearly 2,500 aircraft at his command, sleek Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, deadly Ju-87 Stukas, and squadrons of bombers capable of leveling entire cities. Across the Channel, Britain can muster barely 700 operational fighters. To Göring, the outcome seems inevitable. His men believe the British will surrender after the first heavy raids. But the Luftwaffe underestimates 2 crucial forces: British technology and British spirit. In Whitehall, Prime Minister Churchill studies reports and intelligence intercepts. He knows the odds are grim, yet he refuses to bow. He orders the military to prepare for invasion. Beaches are mined, coastlines fortified, and citizens trained for defense. "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be," he declares. "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight in the fields, and we shall never surrender." The German invasion plan is ambitious but fragile. Every step depends on air superiority. If the Luftwaffe fails, Celion cannot proceed. Hitler's generals know it, but few dare to tell him. In secret, the RAF builds its network: radar stations, command centers, and observer posts. Dowding's system begins to take shape, one that can see the enemy long before he arrives. For now, the Channel lies quiet. But beneath the calm, both sides are preparing for the storm to come, one that will decide the future of Europe. In the heart of Britain's defense stands Fighter Command, led by Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, a man more at home with maps and calculations than medals and ceremony. His methods are not flashy, but they are brilliant. Dowding understands that Britain cannot afford to lose aircraft or pilots faster than they can be replaced. Every sortie, every scramble must count. His fighter force is small, barely enough to guard the coastline. Yet within that force lies a spirit no machine can measure. Pilots come from every corner of the empire: Britain, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and dozens from occupied nations: Poland, Czechoslovakia, and France. They have one thing in common: a determination to stop the Nazi war machine at any cost. Training is relentless. Young men barely out of school are thrust into combat after just a few dozen flying hours. Many will not survive their first mission. They know it and they go anyway. In hangars and dispersal huts, nervous laughter hides the fear that tomorrow's dawn scramble may be their last. Behind the pilots, thousands of unseen heroes keep the RAF alive: engineers, mechanics, radio operators, and women of the WAF tracking every blip on radar screens. The defense of Britain is a collective effort, a network of courage and coordination. Dowding's system, radar, ground control, and communication allows him to direct his limited fighters with surgical precision. He calls it the Dowding system. History will call it revolutionary. As July 1940 unfolds, the balance of power seems hopelessly tilted toward Germany. Yet Britain's pilots, these few against the many, are about to prove that courage, discipline, and ingenuity can stand against overwhelming odds. Along the southern coast of England stands a strange line of steel towers, stretching from Dorset to Scotland. To the untrained eye, they look like radio masts. In truth, they are Britain's invisible shield, the chain-home radar network. Developed by scientists like Sir Robert Watson Watt, this early warning system can detect incoming aircraft long before they appear in the sky. It is crude by modern standards, but in 1940 it is nothing short of miraculous. When the Luftwaffe launches an attack, radar operators detect the wave miles away. Information races through telephone lines to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory. There, women of the WAF plot the enemy's course with colored markers on giant maps, while controllers issue calm, clipped orders. Squadron 92, scramble! Within minutes, RAF pilots are racing toward their aircraft, engines roaring, dust swirling. The chain-home network gives them the one thing their enemies lack: time. Time to prepare, time to climb, time to strike. The Germans, confident in their numerical superiority, have no idea how the RAF always seems to know where they will strike. Goering grows suspicious. He orders radar towers to be destroyed, but most survive. Bombers hit the masts, but the steel frames prove remarkably tough. Within hours, the stations are back online. The secret of radar remains hidden, guarded even from many of those who depend on it. It is Britain's great advantage, a silent ally that turns the tide of war from behind the scenes. July 10, 1940, dawn over the Channel. From airfields in France, the Luftwaffe takes to the skies. Waves of bombers and escorting fighters climb into formation, heading for the English coast. The Battle of Britain has begun. German aircraft roar over the white cliffs of Dover, sunlight glinting off their wings. Below, observers sound the alarm. Sirens wail across Kent and Sussex. Within minutes, RAF squadrons scramble from their bases. Engines scream as Spitfires and Hurricanes take flight. The first engagements are chaotic and fierce. Dogfights twist and turn over the Channel. Tracers streak through the morning haze. The calm blue sky becomes a deadly ballet of smoke and flame. At first, Goering is confident. His bombers hit convoys in the Channel and radar masts along the coast. But the British respond faster than expected. Thanks to radar, their fighters are always waiting. Losses mount. In London, Churchill receives reports of the first victories. The mood in the war cabinet lifts slightly. Never in the field of human conflict, he will soon declare, was so much owed by so many to so few. But for now, the battle has just begun. The skies over Britain are a cauldron of fire and fear, and the outcome is far from certain. When the Luftwaffe thundered across the Channel, Britain sent 2 defenders to meet them. One was the elegant thoroughbred, the supermarine Spitfire, all curves and speed, a pilot's dream. The other was the tough workhorse, the Hawker Hurricane, less graceful but solid, dependable, and easier to repair. Together, they would become symbols of defiance. The Spitfire's designer, R.J. Mitchell, had built it with a single vision: to be faster than anything in the sky. Its thin elliptical wings sliced the air like razors, while the Merlin engine howled with fury. The Hurricane, created by Sidney Cam, was older in design, part metal, part fabric, but it could take punishment and still bring its pilot home. On the front lines, the Hurricane shot down more enemy planes than the Spitfire, though the Spitfire captured the world's imagination. Inside their cockpits sat boys barely 20 years old, nervous, determined, and utterly focused. They spoke of tally-ho, as if it were sport. Yet each scramble was a dance with death. The Hurricane pilots often tore into the bomber formations, breaking them apart, while the Spitfires dueled the Messerschmitt escorts high above. From the ground, civilians watched these twisting trails in the sky, the white arcs of vapor, the sudden bloom of fire, and they understood that the fate of their island was being written overhead. The roar of the Merlin engine became the sound of Britain's heartbeat, steady and defiant. They were called simply the Few. Fewer than 3,000 men stood between Britain and annihilation. They came from every corner of the globe: Britain, Poland, Canada, New Zealand, Czechoslovakia, and South Africa. Some were veterans. Others had only weeks of training. All were bound by duty. At dawn, they waited in dispersal huts, sipping lukewarm tea, jackets unzipped, listening for the phone to ring. When it did, the calm vanished. Scramble! The pilots dashed to their aircraft, engines coughing into life. Within minutes, they were climbing into the blinding sun. In combat, everything happened in seconds. A flicker in the mirror, a burst of tracer, and life or death was decided. Some never returned. Others limped home, fuel leaking, planes riddled with holes. They were exhausted, often flying 5-6 sorties a day, but they never refused the next call. Churchill saw them once on an airfield, muddy, unshaven, smiling despite fatigue. Later, he would immortalize them in words that stirred a nation. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Their courage was not loud. It was quiet, persistent, born of necessity. These men became legends, though few would ever call themselves heroes. For them, heroism was simply doing the job and surviving until tomorrow. Before America entered the war, hundreds of young Americans crossed the Atlantic to join the fight. They could not watch tyranny spread across Europe. Some were idealists, others adventurers. A few simply wanted to fly the finest fighters in the world. Together they formed the Eagle Squadrons of the RAF. Flying Spitfires marked with stars and stripes, they carried with them the spirit of two nations. Their accents stood out in ready rooms across southern England, but in the air, courage spoke a universal language. Pilots like Billy Fisk, a former Olympic bobsled champion, and Don Gentile became household names on both sides of the ocean. The risks were immense. If captured, they faced execution as mercenaries. Yet they fought anyway, shoulder to shoulder with British comrades, proving that the Atlantic Ocean was no barrier to conviction. Their presence boosted morale and hinted at a future alliance, one that would soon reshape the entire war. For the British public, the sight of American pilots fighting for their freedom was deeply moving. It was a reminder that even in Britain's darkest hour, she was not truly alone. While men battled in the skies, women fought their own war on the ground. In factories, workshops, and offices, they became the lifeblood of Britain's resistance. Thousands joined the WAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, monitoring radar screens, plotting enemy formations, guiding fighters by radio. Others worked for the Air Transport Auxiliary, ferrying aircraft from factories to airfields, Spitfires, Hurricanes, bombers without weapons, radios, or sometimes even maps. They wore goggles and flight suits, hair tucked beneath scarves, faces streaked with oil. Many had never flown before the war. Now they piloted machines capable of 350 miles per hour. One slip, and there would be no rescue. Yet they flew with calm professionalism, proving that courage was not confined to the front lines. Beyond the airfields, women filled every role imaginable. Engineers, mechanics, code breakers at Bletchley Park, ambulance drivers under falling bombs. At night, as London burned, they carried buckets of sand to douse incendiaries. Their contribution was immense, their recognition long overdue. The Battle of Britain was not only fought by the few, but also by the millions who kept Britain breathing. By mid-August 1940, the air war raged daily over the Channel. This phase, known as the Kanalkampf, was a brutal contest for control of shipping lanes and coastal skies. Every morning, convoys crept through the narrow seas. Every afternoon, German bombers descended upon them like hawks. The RAF scrambled again and again. Pilots climbed into the sun, using it as a shield. The sky became a mosaic of smoke trails and burning engines. Hurricanes dove on the bombers, while Spitfires tangled with the escorting Messerschmitts above. Radio chatter filled the air. Calm commands, frantic warnings, sometimes only static. The battles were short but ferocious. Many ended with planes spiraling into the sea. Fishermen pulled survivors from the water. Others vanished beneath the waves. To the men who fought, the Channel was both protector and grave. Each day tested endurance. Mechanics worked through the night to patch bullet holes and replace engines. Pilots slept in their cockpits, ready for dawn. Civilians watched from the cliffs of Dover as explosions dotted the horizon. Britain was holding, but the pressure was immense. Goering, frustrated by the slow progress, ordered his forces to strike deeper inland. The next stage of the battle was about to begin, one that would bring the war to Britain's very doorstep. By August 1940, the storm had reached its height. The Luftwaffe now turned its full might upon southern England. Goering's strategy was clear. Destroy the Royal Air Force, airfield by airfield, until the skies were empty and Britain lay defenseless. Every day, hundreds of bombers crossed the Channel, their engines a thunderous chorus that echoed through the countryside. The attacks came in waves. First, the reconnaissance aircraft, sleek and fast, probing the defenses. Then the bombers, Heinkels, Dorniers, and Junkers filling the sky with menace. Behind them came the fighters, Messerschmitt 109s hungry for combat. Their targets were the lifeblood of fighter command, radar stations, fuel depots, and airfields. At Biggin Hill, Tangmere, and Kenley, the ground shook under relentless assault. Runways were cratered, hangars burned, and control towers shattered. Pilots landed on damaged strips, their tires bursting, their planes riddled with holes. Yet somehow, the RAF refused to break. Mechanics repaired what they could, often working through the night by torchlight, hands trembling from exhaustion. Dowding and his commanders, Keith Park and Trafford Lee-Mallory, faced impossible decisions. Every sortie meant risking irreplaceable pilots. Every delay meant more destruction on the ground. But Dowding trusted his system. Radar spotted the incoming raids, and his controllers directed squadrons with precision that bordered on miraculous. The Germans never understood how the RAF always seemed to appear at the right place, at the right moment. In Berlin, Hitler waited for news of victory that never came. Goering promised results, but every day the RAF fought back, bloodied but unbowed. The German losses grew, and frustration turned to rage. The battle had become a test not only of machines, but of will. August 18, 1940, a date that would live in memory as the hardest day. At dawn, both sides prepared for a massive confrontation. Goering ordered coordinated attacks on key airfields across southern England. His goal, to deliver a knockout blow that would end the RAF's resistance once and for all. By mid-morning, radar picked up vast formations crossing the Channel. Fighter commands scrambled every available squadron. The sky erupted into chaos. At Kenley and Biggin Hill, bombs fell in torrents. Hangars exploded. Aircraft burned where they stood. Ground crews dived for cover as shrapnel tore through the air. Overhead, hundreds of fighters tangled in desperate combat. The roar of engines, the crack of machine guns, the screams over the radio, it was a symphony of destruction. Pilots fought until their ammunition ran dry, diving into clouds to escape pursuit, only to emerge into fresh waves of enemies. One by one, planes fell flaming to the ground or vanished into the sea. When evening came, the smoke still hung over the airfields. Both sides had suffered terrible losses. The Luftwaffe lost more than 70 aircraft. The RAF nearly 40. But Britain had held. The airfields, though scarred and smoking, were still operational. The pilots, battered and exhausted, still stood ready to fight again. For the first time, Goering began to doubt. His quick victory had turned into a grinding war of attrition. And the British people, instead of collapsing in despair, grew stronger in resolve. The battle for the skies was no longer just military, it had become a matter of national soul. In September 1940, the war came to the heart of Britain. Frustrated by his inability to destroy the RAF, Hitler made a fateful decision. He would break the British spirit by bombing their capital into submission. Thus began the Blitz. On the evening of September 7th, Londoners heard the sirens wail. Searchlights swept across the darkened sky as hundreds of bombers approached. Then the city erupted. Docks, factories, and homes were consumed in flame. The Thames glowed red with reflection. Whole streets vanished under the weight of destruction. But amid the firestorm, courage flourished. Firefighters battled the inferno through the night, their faces blackened with soot. Air raid wardens led families into underground stations, turning the tunnels of the London Underground into cities beneath the earth. Children slept on platforms as the bombs thundered above. The RAF responded with everything it had. Fighters met the enemy at the edges of the city, shooting down bombers before they could reach their targets. Yet the raids continued, night after night. The Germans called it terror bombing. The British called it survival. Through it all, Churchill refused to yield. He visited bombed neighborhoods, walking among the ruins, comforting survivors. "We can take it," Londoners told him. And they meant it. Their resilience turned tragedy into defiance. The Blitz, meant to shatter morale, instead forged a nation's unity in fire. The decision to bomb London would prove to be Hitler's great mistake. By turning his attention from the RAF's airfields to the cities, he gave Fighter Command the breathing space it desperately needed. For the first time in weeks, air bases could repair, refuel, and regroup. Dowding's fighters were back at full strength. Historians still debate why Hitler changed strategy. Some say it was revenge, retaliation for a British raid on Berlin. Others believe Goering simply misjudged the RAF's strength. Whatever the reason, the shift in targets marked a turning point. While London burned, the Luftwaffe lost its momentum. Pilots now faced longer flights, heavier losses, and fierce resistance over unfamiliar territory. German intelligence failed to grasp that the RAF's command structure remained intact. Radar stations still operated, and morale had soared. Churchill's words galvanized the public. "We shall fight in the air, and we shall never surrender." In homes and shelters, families listened to the BBC, drawing comfort from his voice. The battle had become more than a struggle for dominance. It was a fight for the future of civilization itself. By mid-September, Goering's confidence had evaporated. His air fleets were bleeding strength. Fuel and pilots were harder to replace. For the first time, the Luftwaffe began to fear the hunters had become the hunted. As the leaves began to fall in September 1940, the tide of battle turned. Britain's defenses were recovering, and its pilots were growing sharper with each engagement. The Luftwaffe, weary and overextended, began to falter. The hunters were now being hunted. RAF squadrons intercepted German raids with increasing precision. The once invincible bomber formations were torn apart in daylight. German crews who once mocked their British foes now dreaded the call to fly. "They were always there," one Luftwaffe pilot recalled. "No matter what time we came, the Spitfires found us." The skies over southern England became a graveyard for the invaders' hopes. Every downed German plane lifted British morale. Every returning RAF pilot was a living symbol of defiance. Even those who did not return were remembered as heroes. Churchill toured Fighter Command headquarters, shaking the hands of pilots and ground crews alike. "You have saved this country," he told them simply. "You have saved the world." His praise was no exaggeration. For the first time, Nazi Germany had been stopped. By late September, the outcome was clear. Hitler postponed Operation Celian. The invasion of Britain, once declared inevitable, was quietly shelved. Britain stood battered but unbroken. Against impossible odds, an island nation had defied the greatest military machine on Earth. The Battle of Britain was not yet over, but victory was now within sight. The roar of Merlin engines still filled the air, but it was now the sound of endurance, of triumph taking shape in the smoke and sunlight above England's fields. By late September 1940, the storm clouds that had hung over Britain for months began to thin. The Luftwaffe was faltering. What had started as an unstoppable onslaught now stumbled under its own weight. German crews were weary, their numbers shrinking, and their spirit cracking. The British, by contrast, seemed only to grow stronger the longer the fight continued. The balance of the air war was shifting. Radar and discipline were proving more powerful than numbers and noise. Each new sortie by the RAF carried the weight of experience, forged through weeks of constant combat. Pilots who had once been green and terrified were now hardened veterans, men who could spot an incoming Messerschmitt by instinct alone. On the ground, too, efficiency had become a weapon. Mechanics repaired damaged fighters in record time. Supply chains kept ammunition and fuel flowing despite bombed roads and shattered depots. Civilians volunteered to spot enemy aircraft, track their routes, and feed vital information to fighter command. Every village became a part of the defense. The Germans had expected a swift, decisive campaign. Instead, they found themselves locked in a battle of endurance, and it was one they could not sustain. When Hitler looked westward now, he saw not a broken island, but a fortress of iron will and unbending courage. In Berlin, tempers flared. Goering promised results he could no longer deliver. His commanders demanded more aircraft, more fuel, more time, but there was no more to give. Losses had outpaced replacements. Crews were exhausted, and the English Channel had become a graveyard for their ambitions. Operation Sea Leon, the planned invasion of Britain, was quietly postponed. The official announcement came couched in vague language about unfavorable weather conditions. But everyone inside the German high command knew the truth. Without control of the skies, no invasion was possible. For the first time, Hitler had been stopped. He turned his gaze eastward toward the Soviet Union, already plotting his next conquest. Britain, meanwhile, stood alone but unbeaten. In the cities, the bombings continued, yet beneath the ruins, life went on. The baker still opened his shop at dawn. The milkman made his rounds through streets lined with rubble. Children carried their gas masks to school, laughing as if nothing could ever touch them. The British government declared the worst had passed. But for the men and women who had lived through those endless nights of fire and fear, the war was far from over. Still, a strange sense of victory hung in the air. The invasion had not come. The island still stood. When the news broke that the Germans had halted their invasion plans, relief swept through Britain like sunlight after rain. Bells rang in villages for the first time since war began. Newspapers carried headlines of defiance. "The few have done it!" At RAF bases, young pilots gathered for a rare moment of celebration. Some smiled, others wept quietly. Many were missing friends who had not lived to see this day. For them, victory was bittersweet. The cost had been immense. Hundreds of aircraft lost and more than 500 pilots killed. Yet their sacrifice had preserved not just Britain, but hope itself. The nation's gratitude was boundless. Winston Churchill spoke in the House of Commons, his voice solemn yet proud. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Those words immortalized the RAF pilots forever as the few. They were no longer anonymous soldiers of the sky. They were legends. In pubs and parlors across the nation, people raised glasses to them. Their bravery became the symbol of British defiance, their endurance a promise that tyranny would not prevail. And though the war would rage for years yet to come, something fundamental had changed. The illusion of Nazi invincibility had been shattered in the clear skies above southern England. Victory, however, carried its own burden. Much of southern England lay scarred and smoking. London's East End was a landscape of ruins, shattered homes, blackened churches, silent streets. Thousands had lost everything. The smell of dust and burned timber hung heavy in the air, but amid the devastation, the British spirit endured. Communities pulled together. Neighbors shared food and shelter. Women took on new roles, working in factories, hospitals, and air raid shelters. Children were evacuated to the countryside, where they grew up hearing stories of their parents' courage under fire. For the RAF, the struggle was far from over. Planes still fell, pilots still died, and the nights were still filled with sirens and explosions. Yet each morning brought renewed determination. Britain had survived the storm, and in that survival lay the seeds of ultimate victory. The Battle of Britain had proved something extraordinary, that courage and unity could triumph over overwhelming force. It was not merely a military victory, but a moral one, a testament to the power of faith, resilience, and freedom. Even as Hitler shifted his gaze toward the east, he refused to let Britain rest. The Luftwaffe began a new phase of bombing, relentless night raids that turned cities into firestorms. This was the Blitz. Night after night, bombers droned overhead. London, Coventry, Liverpool, and Birmingham burned beneath waves of destruction. The sky glowed red. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Entire neighborhoods vanished in moments. And yet, Britain endured. In the underground stations, families huddled together on cold platforms, singing songs to drown out the sounds of war above. Children clutched toys. Mothers whispered prayers. Firefighters and ambulance crews worked tirelessly, pulling survivors from the rubble, risking their lives for strangers. The government's message was simple: keep calm and carry on. And carry on they did. Factories continued to produce weapons. Food was rationed but never stopped. And the RAF defended the night skies with radar-guided precision. By early 1941, it was clear that bombing would not break the British spirit. The Blitz, intended to crush morale, had instead hardened it. Out of ashes and fear rose a single, unyielding truth: Britain would never surrender. By the dawn of 1941, Europe lay in chains. France had fallen. Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, all had bowed before the Nazi war machine. Only Britain remained free, a small island defying the full weight of tyranny. From the white cliffs of Dover to the streets of Glasgow, the nation stood firm. The battle in the skies had saved more than a homeland. It had preserved the very idea of resistance. For the first time, Hitler had been denied victory. Every day, British ships crossed the Atlantic under threat of submarine attack. Supplies from America arrived at terrible cost: wheat, steel, and oil that kept the engines of war turning. Churchill called it the long haul, and he knew that Britain must hold out alone until help could come. Above, the RAF continued its vigil. Fighter Command defended the homeland while Bomber Command began to strike back at Germany's industrial heart. The hunter had become the hunted. But Britain's survival owed not only to pilots and soldiers, it owed everything to its people. Housewives with brooms cleared debris after air raids. Children gathered scrap metal for the war effort. And through it all, Churchill's voice echoed on the radio. Steady and unbreakable, we shall never surrender. The message was clear. Britain would fight on, no matter the cost. Across the Atlantic, the world was watching. American newspapers carried headlines of British courage, of Spitfires battling the odds. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, though his nation was still neutral, saw in Britain's struggle the defense of civilization itself. He called it the arsenal of democracy, and he meant it. Slowly, the United States began to send aid, food, munitions, and eventually aircraft under the Lend-Lease Act. American factories roared to life, producing planes that would one day fight alongside the RAF. In the Soviet Union, too, the Battle of Britain was studied with awe. Stalin's generals recognized something remarkable: that Hitler's air force, once believed invincible, had been stopped. Britain's defiance gave hope to the world. Occupied nations whispered of freedom again. Resistance movements in France and Poland found new courage. And even in Germany, quiet dissent began to stir among those who doubted their Führer's vision of endless conquest. The skies over England had done more than decide a battle. They had reignited faith in human endurance. The war was far from over, but the tide had begun to turn. As 1941 unfolded, the echoes of the Battle of Britain stretched far beyond Europe. The lessons learned in those skies reshaped air warfare around the world. The United States, preparing for the inevitable, studied British radar systems and defensive coordination. The tactics developed by Dowding and his commanders became the foundation for modern air defense. Pilots who had survived the battle were sent as instructors to Canada and the United States, training a new generation of flyers who would one day fight across the world, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, had been forever changed. Its losses had crippled its long-range strength. The dream of global air domination had vanished over the fields of Kent and Sussex. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union later that year, its air force was powerful but stretched thin. The cost of failure over Britain had come back to haunt it. And when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing America into the war, the balance of global power shifted decisively. The Battle of Britain had shown the world that the Axis could be beaten, not easily, not quickly, but beaten nonetheless. In the years that followed, as the Allies advanced through Europe and the skies filled with bombers and fighters from every front, the legacy of the Battle of Britain remained sacred. The few, as Churchill had named them, became living legends. Many were barely out of their teens when they faced the might of Hitler's war machine. Some never lived to see peace, but their courage became eternal. Museums would later display their uniforms, their logbooks, their aircraft. Visitors would stand in silence before the shattered propeller of a Spitfire or the crumpled remains of a Hurricane, realizing that these relics were more than metal. They were symbols of freedom itself. The battle also changed the very nature of war. Air superiority became the deciding factor in every campaign that followed. The RAF's victory proved that the skies were not merely a theater of combat, they were the key to survival. As time passed, Britain rebuilt. The bombed-out streets gave way to new homes, new industries, and new generations who could play beneath peaceful skies once again. But the memory of that desperate summer, of the roar of engines, of courage in the face of fire, would never fade. For it was then that Britain found its greatest strength, the unbreakable will of ordinary people who refused to bow. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in 1945, the world stood transformed. Cities lay in ruins, empires had crumbled, and tens of millions were dead. But freedom had survived, and its first defense had been won in the skies above Britain. In those critical months of 1940, when invasion loomed and the future seemed lost, the Royal Air Force had held the line. Their victory was not just Britain's, it was the world's. The Battle of Britain became the symbol of defiance, proof that courage, intelligence, and unity could triumph over tyranny. It showed that even in the darkest hour, humanity's spirit could still shine brighter than the flames of war. Today, the fields of southern England are quiet. The sound of Spitfires and Messerschmitts has faded into history. Yet sometimes when the wind is right, people say you can still hear the faint echo of engines, a whisper of the past, reminding us that freedom was once fought for in the skies. Churchill's immortal words still echo across generations. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. And so it was. The few, and the nation that stood with them, changed the course of history forever. This was the Battle of Britain. This was the moment the world refused to fall.